But my concern is that I had just heard Merrick Garland say a few days earlier, probably 5 days prior to getting this email,
we're not doing this.
We are not doing this under the counterterrorism resources banner. And that's the real difference. That was actually my specific whistleblower problem. As many people may have looked at the statute, it says that there's like a very narrow scope of things that are considered to be whistleblower status. And you have to basically make a violation of rule, law, policy. You have to be a gross public safety issue. There's a couple others, fraud, waste, and abuse. And in my case, I believed that the attorney general may have perjured himself, which would be a violation of law. And he had done so in front of Congress, saying that we would not use counterterrorism resources to go after parents. And specifically, I had that belief because Carlton Peoples was the assistant director of the counterterrorism division, and he sent this thing out. And so when the AD of counterterrorism sends out a thing saying we're going to be tagging investigations into parents at school boards, and the attorney general says that we're not doing that, that seems to me like a real problem.
Hey, Culminators, how you doing? Thanks again for dropping in. So I first became familiar with Kyle Seraphin when I was privileged to see him appear in Dinesh D'Souza's, how shall I put it? Well, his rather disappointing and painful to watch, not because it wasn't very well done, film called A Police State, which I have reviewed online, and I recommend that people see it. Kyle Seraphin is everywhere. He's everywhere. He has been there. He has done that, and he's had it done to him. And I'm hoping that in the course of our discussion, I can find something that he hasn't already said in the numerous other interviews that he's done, from Tucker Carlson and Dan Bongino to people perhaps who are even tinier than I am, or maybe this is an all-time low for him. I don't know. Kyle, welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you. Definitely not an all-time low. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. I want to play from your Rumble channel one tiny little excerpt because I think it's a really good place for us to start.
Kyle Seraphin, I can't thank you enough for speaking out. I knew you guys were out there, and I knew it was just a matter of time. You got a lot of guts putting your face and your name to this. You're doing a service on behalf of the American people, and from the bottom of my cracked and broken heart sometimes, thank you very much.
Let me ask you, Kyle, first, to be fair to our listeners and viewers, both of them, my mom.
I know that feeling. My mom watches mine as well.
If my mom watched mine, she would write me out.
Is that right?
Not that there's much to write out, but let's put it this way. What my mom watches is The View.
Yeah.
No further
She's
questions.
The one. I was wondering who the audience was. It's her mother. That's good.
No,
I often wonder that. I wonder who watches The View, who's going to those ladies as authorities, and there obviously are some.
Unfortunately, it's ladies like my mom. It really. So, in any event, give the viewers the short version. Tell us how you went from being an FBI agent to social media pond scum.
Pretty straightforward, although it's didn't make any sense at the time. So I'm 42 years old. I'm a father of 4 now. I was a father of 3 when I left the FBI. I'm a military veteran of the Air Force. I joined the Air Force to do hard things and try to drop warheads on foreheads on bad people. That was the mindset I had at 27 years old. And before that, I had an entirely, weird adolescent life of being a guy who ran a restaurant in Kansas, and I sold ergonomic office furniture in San Francisco, and I worked for a movie studio. So I did a bunch of these other weird things. I worked in finance and this kind of thing. And then I thought, what am I doing in my life? Why am I not creating or destroying something? I went towards the destroying thing. That made more sense to me. And
so in other words, you wanted an impact. You want, this is actually, I think,
literally impactful.
You want to feel like you're leaving a mark on the world.
That's right.
And it can be, you could build or you could leave a crater. So you opted for the crater.
I came from a family where we did a lot of manual labor. I grew up with a lot of calluses on my hands from digging holes. My dad was famous for digging holes. I planted trees. I dug trenches. I did a lot of landscaping.
I've got a tweet thread to share with you after we get on. I wrote on this a couple of years ago. Sorry to interrupt you, but I'll forget it. My dad, blessed memory, was a white collar worker, high school graduate. He once got a job on a cement mixer. One day.
I know that. I've done that job in a
One
warehouse.
day.
One day in a warehouse was all I amassed because they put me on a forklift with no qualifications. I did this in high school, and my buddy and I just drove around and broke stuff all over the place. I did so much damage, and God bless them, they actually paid me for it too. They actually wrote me a check, which I was embarrassed to accept. But I drove around on a forklift. I ran a forklift full speed, not knowing how to handle it, into a two-story tall pile of styrofoam, like, what do you call it? Like food containers. Right. It was a dry goods.
Yeah.
It was a dry goods warehouse. I hit it at full speed and destroyed it. And amongst other things, I also ran the tines into the back of like this pallet full of like grape juice or something. It was all these cans of grape juice, and I spiked it, at full speed because I didn't know what I was doing. And I pulled back out, and I'm like, oh shit, I got to get out of here. I got to go somewhere else. So I ended up going somewhere else, and trying to just not be in that part of the warehouse where I was destroying things.
And this was just a month ago. And you obviously
no, I just did that.
Okay, I'm sorry. Now back. No, but actually, my Twitter thread was not really about my dad, but it was about how by becoming a country in which young people, compared to me, you're young people, but I mean real young people, increasingly have no relationship to the physical world in terms of labor. That's in terms of building things and everything's virtual, and we're an information-based economy, and chances are that's not doing us any favors. But okay, maybe we'll come back to that. Most likely,
I think that's very true, and we may actually come back to that because I think it's totally relevant. I grew up building things with my hands. I grew up putting wood together with screws and glue and nails. I do all my own repairs in my home. I redid a bathroom because somebody told me it was going to cost $15,000, and I went, no, it's going to cost me $2,000. So I did it myself in my free time when I was an FBI agent, no less. I renovated my entire house. I lived in Virginia because, as you know, you move into the Northeast, you got to buy something that the people who built it would be shocked to find out what it costs today. And it's not in any better condition than when they bought it or built it. It's actually in way worse condition. It's destroyed. It was something that shouldn't have even stood past the 80s. And there I was, like, redoing bathrooms. So something about manual labor made sense to me. Something about creating or destroying made sense to me. I was in a kind of an angry phase, like so many young men. And at 27, I joined the military literally to destroy. I went into a profession to drop warheads on foreheads, as that's actually the casual way of saying it, but it's a special operations job to drop ordnance, and it's known as combat control. And I made it 18 months of training, which is a long time to be training to do something, and I just about died.
In other words, this is something different from merely being a bomber pilot.
This is something on the ground, yeah. So somebody has to make the smart bombs land where they belong.
Oh, you're the guy. Oh, you're the guy with the on the ground giving the coordinates.
That was the goal. Yeah. So I trained to do that. I became an air traffic controller. I went to survival school with the Air Force. I went to airborne school and jumped out of planes with the Army. And I was getting prepared to graduate. I had gone through demolition and a bunch of other training. And as I was wrapping up, I basically almost died at Fort Bragg, which is where special forces are based, and where we do our final training there for that particular skill set. And as I nearly died, I was a couple of weeks away from graduation. I'm out in the field, and I got a body temp over 106, which was validated by a rectal thermometer, which is not a fun experience, but that was the least of my problems at that point in time because I was almost dying. I literally had lost control of all my bodily functions. I couldn't let go of the rifle I had in my hands. I couldn't control my bowels or my bladder or anything. I was a mess. I was a complete disaster. They ended up cutting my pack off, cutting up all my clothing, tying a bowline around me and throwing me into a creek with just my boxers on and a pair of boots. So
just to cool you down.
I just hung out there, in the river, just kind of floating around thinking about my life choices, which was a weird moment. And I remember very dramatically that the medic who was checking on me, I became a paramedic after that as well as part of my other training. And one of it was weird, but it's basically a mental acuity check. And he said, sing me your favorite song. And I didn't have a favorite song because I was dying. I didn't have a favorite song at all. I just thought of Bohemian Rhapsody from Queen. So that's what I sang him when I was laying there, like covered in ice and laying on a piece of wood while stripped down, almost naked, and just trying to figure out what was going on. And the question is real. Yeah. Is this the real life? Is this fantasy? I mean, it was all there. So that goes on. I ended up becoming a paramedic. They gave me another opportunity. I went to combat dive school and a bunch of other things. And I got out of the Air Force with all these skills. They never, I was never deployable. I actually was waiting on a last school. And during that time, I had kind of a falling out with my command structure because I was 32 years old going through the same training that a lot of 18 and 19-year-olds go through. And I had a 19-year-old roommate who refused to buy toilet paper and had a $900 a month Jeep payment and all the things that young guys in the military do. Because I'm enlisted. I'm an enlisted guy with a college degree, with a well above average IQ, surrounded by some lovable morons doing moron things. And just what we used to call, we always say that, kind of doing like the meathead routine. And I loved it. I mean, I absolutely love it. I love meathead stuff. I love hard things for the sake of being hard, just because that's what men meant in my head. And despite all that, didn't get to deploy, didn't get to go. And so I ended up leaving the Air Force, looking around going like, okay, now what the hell am I going to do? And so I did a couple things at the same time because I'm always hedging bets. I threw in a bunch of applications for government agencies that seemed to make sense. I thought maybe I'd be decent in the CIA as a case officer, but I don't speak any languages, so I was probably no good. I thought maybe the State Department was interesting for me. I considered being a military officer, so I started working down that route. And then I threw in one with the FBI, obviously. And then I also went back to school because I had the GI Bill. So I started taking all these college courses because I thought, well, I'm a paramedic. I've got thousands of clinical hours right now. Maybe I go and I become either a PA or an emergency room physician, and that suits the need to create something good, help lives.
And for action.
Yeah, I mean, I'm an outdoor dog. I need to be moving. I need to be touching things. I need to be kinetic in many ways.
Whereas I'm an avid indoorsman, as I've said several times on Twitter.
I know that there are those, look, it takes both kinds. There's no question about it. Like, we can't have both. Not everybody can be outside because there's other things to do, right? Some things have to be done indoors.
That's right.
So there I am.
What? You got a call from the FBI.
The weirdest possible way I get the call from the FBI. I basically gave up on the FBI because I forgot about it because they take forever to get back to you. And my wife and I decided that we were going to leave and enter the second oldest profession in the world, being a hotelier. And we were going to open a bed and breakfast in Vermont, which I'd never been to. And that's what we decided to do. So we packed up all of our stuff in Austin, Texas, and we put everything in storage. And we sold everything that didn't fit. We climbed in our little station wagon and we drove to Vermont. And immediately within an hour of being there, my wife said we could never live here, which is always interesting because we had no place to live. We'd moved out. We'd rented out our apartment that we owned, and
you had completely bought into the idea that you would buy and manage a bed and breakfast in a place you'd never been to, in a region you'd evidently never been to.
Never been to. No. Yeah, that's the kind of guy I am. That should tell you a lot about the kind of guy I am.
Well, I'll tell you one thing you're not is someone who says, well, you're not someone who is a prisoner of the sunk cost fallacy. Obviously, in fact, that's the story of your life, I think, is what we're beginning to see. Because you might have said
there are lookers and there are leapers, I find. And a lot of people will look forever and they will measure and they will cut and they will always try to find the angle. And some people just go, looks good enough, let's do it. And I'm somewhere between there, but I'm definitely more on the leap side. I don't go without thinking. I did have a backup plan. I had a job interview up in Vermont. I had a paramedic job interview, which I canceled because my wife said, we're not going to live here. She said, this is where axe murderers live. And so we decided not to live where the axe murderers live.
Wait, that was her assessment. Had you been living in Virginia at the time?
No, we were living in Texas. We went from Texas. Now, the only good news is my wife is from Brooklyn. She grew up in New York City. She was born in Manhattan, grew up in Brooklyn, spent her time around there. So it wasn't foreign to her. And she'd done a bunch of Google Earth research, what we would call map reconnaissance in the military. She'd done a bunch of map recon, which turned out to be not translatable into her actually liking the town we went to. But that was the goal. And so that failed. But luckily, the FBI called me about the same time. And they said, hey, we'd like to start this long hiring process with you. And I went and did an interview in New Haven, Connecticut.
Oh.
Did another interview. Finally,
so in other words, you stayed in New England because
we did.
You're out of gas.
That's it. Yeah, the diesels run out on the turbo diesel. We ended up staying in Connecticut for a little while with my in-laws and kind of looking around. They've got a big farmhouse on some acreage. I did some handyman work for them. We were kind of figuring out. We had money put away. We had income. We had rental income because we rented out our condo. So we were.
Oh, you didn't sell it. You rented it out. Okay.
That's right. Yeah. So we were homeless but not destitute. Like I find myself many times in my life now.
Okay.
And so we're looking around going, well, okay, what comes next? FBI calls. That looks interesting. You can't count on it, but you can't ignore it. So I ended up doing my interview in New York City. I went down to Federal Plaza and did the interview there. And they do what's called phase 2. So they have you do a writing sample, which I thought I crushed, and I guess I did okay. And then they do an interview that's very, very weird. It's the weirdest interview you've ever done. It's 3 people looking at you, asking questions. And even when you crack a really good joke, which I had a few of them, and I knew it, they just look up at you and then they look back down because they're not allowed by the rules to give you a human reaction, which is the weirdest way to interview somebody. It's really awful and really bad. But that's what they do. And then basically they said, yeah, you're hired and we've got to get through your background check. So maybe we'll see you in a year or so. And so then you go, well, what am I going to do? My wife ends up taking a job back in Texas. So we ended up moving down the street from our old house that we were still getting rental income from that we owned. And we did that for a little while. And then I finally went to Quantico in 2016. This is the longer version, but it's kind of funny, I guess. And it tells you a little bit about me. I joined in 2016. I went in for the summer, and I immediately, within the first couple hours of being at Quantico, decided that this was probably going to be a very difficult job to retire from, because it's not what it's cracked up to be in any way, shape, or form. What you believe Quantico is, if you've never been, and what it actually is, are not the same things.
Surprisingly, I've never been.
Yeah. It's just not the same. You know, you have this expectation that it's going to be something, it's going to be elite, it's going to be difficult, it's going to be paramilitary. And instead, it is gentle and soft and government and people who make crying noises when they have to do a bunch of push-ups. And, you know, nobody knows how to suffer silently. And at least a third of the people there, I have no idea how they got there. A third of them seemed well overqualified. And then a third of them were kind of in my boat, where you're like, let's just see how you perform when you put your spikes on. It was not academically difficult.
In other words, this is going to be a hard job to retire from because it's so cushy.
It just wasn't the people that I thought it was going to be. I thought I was going there to go with meat eaters, because that's kind of what I had come out of the military and assumed that people were going to be there. And there are some meat eaters, you know, meat eaters in the FBI, outdoor dogs that want to do outdoor things, that will do hard things simply because they're hard or because they're asked of them. Like, will you go, you know, one of my early surveillance gigs that I did, I was working counterintelligence, and somebody asked me, hey, we need someone to climb up every morning at 4 a.m. and go lay in this this trash dump. You need to crawl in it and lay at this fence line and take pictures of this guy coming in who's working for the Virginia Department of Transportation. And we believe, we don't know what vehicles he's showing up in, but we need to try to figure out what he's riding in and how he's getting around and do what we call pattern of life, so we can arrest him later because he's involved in this big public corruption scandal. And I was like, yeah, I'm in. Yeah, obviously. And, you know, 2 or 3 days, it was freezing cold and it was raining, you know, and I just low crawled in through a bunch of, you know, dirt and trash. And it's like in this waste area, and I'm sitting on a fence line with a camera, and that's what I did.
But it was something to do.
Doctors, oh
you were
yeah,
looking
of
for
course.
action.
I'm like, I'm laying there in the freezing cold, like I'm living my best life. That's the dream. Everybody who joins the FBI thinks at some point they're going to tap them on the shoulder and be like, Seraphin, I need you in that pile of dirt for, you know, 5 hours in the dark, you know, looking for a bad guy. You're like, yeah, of course I'm going to be there. So I love that. That was great for me. Everyone else thought it was a terrible post, but that sounded fun to me. And I ended up being able to do that full time. So what I did is I ended up leaving the counterintelligence, which is just spying on theoretically Chinese spies, was what we were supposed to do. We did a lot of like spying on Americans that really bothered me. And when I would complain about it or say, I don't understand what we're doing or what the motivation is, and I came to realize afterwards that they do what's called reverse targeting, which is explicitly illegal by federal law. And it's done all the time. This is the FISA 702 coverage that people are kind of talking about, and it's up for renewal, and it should not be renewed. It's a dangerous tool to give to an intelligence agency that also has law enforcement capabilities. But that's what I did. And it was very unsatisfying. In fact, I had this funny conversation with my boss, and he goes, you're not a good agent. And I go, yeah, I know, but that's not the real question. Like, I'm not going to fight you on that. The question is, why am I not very good? And he was like, oh, why? And I go, because I don't understand what we're doing. We're not trying to get criminal charges.
And you care to understand. It bothers you. The problem here, because how many other people understood? Maybe 2/3, maybe a third didn't, maybe a third understood, maybe 2/3 probably didn't, but they didn't care.
Yeah, most people are there to get the paycheck. We call it the golden eagle, and it comes and it craps in your bank account, you know, every 2 weeks. And as long as
What's
that's
reverse
happening,
targeting though? I don't want to lose that.
Reverse targeting is so the way that 702 works. 702 is a provision of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, which allows specific spying on people who are assumed to be involved in espionage or being directed by foreign intelligence. Now, they've expanded it out, and they've also sort of included terrorist states or foreign terrorist actors. I have a real problem with that. I don't know if that's codified by law or just by practice, but it's really dangerous because anytime you creep out these authorities. But 702 is like a shorter version of that. Normal FISA takes a lot of work. There's a thing called the Woods file, which is supposed to be a check and a balance on the agents. You have to validate and document every single source and every single fact, and you bring it in front of the FISC, which is the Secret Surveillance Court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court, and then they do, in this ex parte hearing, decide whether or not you have the probable cause necessary to get the warrant, which is incredibly invasive. Like, they can put microphones in your house, they can put microphones in your car and video cameras and all kinds of wild stuff. and it's all, the techniques are classified, and the information that they get from them become classified by route of the actual methods they're using. So all this stuff it's supposed to be really difficult to do. It turns out it's actually not that hard because they can lie about it, but it's supposed to be very hard. And so when they do that, that's one. But FISA 702 is a very light version of that. And in comparison, a true full FISA will take you weeks to prepare and lots of back and forth between the attorneys and the agents and the analysts that are doing it. And then they send it off and it all becomes, sort of blessed off and kosher. And then they go and do the collection. 702, I've written up a 702 in a morning and it's been approved by the end of the week. So it's very, very short. It's very quick timeline. And what you are targeting is explicitly a foreign actor involved in an intelligence service or intelligence gathering that is both a foreign actor and overseas, and they cannot be physically in the United States. So imagine I'm going to do one on a Chinese spy who lives in China, and the minute that Chinese spy picks up a what do you call it, like a plane ticket, right, and flies in and lands in Dulles, then we have to turn off that collection because now they're on U.S. soil. So we're no longer able to collect on people once they even if they're someone that would otherwise be targeted, the minute they get domestic, we're done with them.
In other words, if you're proceeding under 702 and not a full FISA,
correct. That's
supposed
702.
to be how it goes.
Correct. But the problem is, and this is explicitly forbidden by law, is you cannot use that 702 to go in, because I'm going to get all the emails of that person. I'm going to get maybe their Skype calls. I'm going to get their text messages if it goes across, any US wires and it's something I can gather. I'm not supposed to go search through that database of things that are collected under 702 and look for Ron Coleman. I can't go look for a US citizen. If I do that, then I am now targeting you. I'm using their collection to target somebody else. That's reverse targeting.
That's
and it's explicitly forbidden by law. And that's the only way that tool is most useful to a criminal investigator. I always tell people, it's like imagining people going through TSA, right? So if I tell you got to go through TSA, imagine you're a TSA agent. And you like to touch people, right? Because you like that you get to do the pat downs and
I have to jam this into my eye socket, okay, so that I can imagine. All right. So now that you're imagining that your job is to make sure that weapons do not make it onto an aircraft. That's your job. And you have this tool in front of you, and the tool is a magnetometer, a metal detector, and everyone must go through the metal detector. Now I add a new complication. Everyone's going to go through the metal detector. Your job is to make sure that no guns get on the airplane, but under no circumstances are you permitted to use the magnetometer to identify guns. Ready, go. Right.
You're going to use the magnetometer. You have no other choice. And so when you're a criminal investigator looking for people involved in espionage or treason or various things that might be selling out the United States, and you have this powerful tool that identifies people who are in contact with actual foreign agents, you're going to use it for that thing. And that's why it's so powerful and dangerous. And I don't know how you use it properly if you're doing the job of an FBI agent, which is not a real job. There is no job FBI agent. The job is 1811 series criminal investigator. So even if you don't do criminal investigations, that's your title. That's what you're trained to do. You're meant to go look for violations of law.
Special agent. What's a special agent?
So special agent is actually, it's funny. The idea of being a government agent, like Joe Biden is a government agent. The Secretary of State is a government agent. An agent of the government who can make binding rulings on behalf of the federal government. That's a government agent. A special agent actually has a limited scope of authority and is only able to enact federal policies and authority in a special way. Special jurisdiction is a better way to think of it. So a special agent is a limited ability to be an agent of the government. And in fact, amusingly, it's not actually a job title, although we use it that way. It is, in fact, it's more like a shorthand for what are your authority sets. Who are you? Are you a constable? Are you a deputy? Are you a deputy sheriff, right? A sheriff's deputy? Are you a police officer? Are you a detective, et cetera? You are a special agent of the government in the criminal investigator role for the FBI. That's what it is.
Who knew?
Now you know.
Okay. So you're with the FBI. You're doing this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So far, so good. You're asking questions. You're not getting great answers.
Yeah, it's not great. I started asking questions too early in my career. And then I ended up basically.
I really, truly found a kindred soul here.
I found myself.
Why are we reviewing these documents that a monkey could review? That's how we make our money, Coleman. Yeah. You ask a lot of questions.
That's right. It's hard to waste your time doing something that you think like this is not necessary. First of all, my question was, why do I need a badge and a gun? Why am I doing this job when someone else should be doing it? You've trained me to go and shoot people and be in dangerous places and do things physical. And now you want me to sit 8 hours to 10 hours behind a computer and read emails in Chinese that I don't read. You didn't assign me a linguist, and the linguist that showed up doesn't know how to read. She can only do it verbally, and we don't have any, we don't have any audio. So this is not very helpful. It makes no sense to me. I'm just asking the questions. Turns out that makes you not the right guy for the job in many ways. So I found a way to get into the surveillance squad that did that full time. It is considered a very, very low rung on the FBI's ladder. Nobody wants to do physical surveillance. I thought it was great. I got to pee in a bottle for 3 straight years, hang out in a car for 8 to 10 hours a day.
You did empty the bottle out, though, during those 3 years, right?
Oh, yeah, over and over again. But I'll tell you another fun thing. I would regularly do these dog and pony shows. People from the military will be familiar with the dog and pony, where basically someone of stature would come in and go, tell us about your program. And you go, well, it's a wonderful program, and this is where all your money is going. And it buys this night vision and these cameras and all this. And what I would always do is I would sneak my pee bottle onto the table of my gear. It would just be an empty Simply Lemonade jar, because they have the best lids. It's really critical to find the right lid. If you're going to have a pee bottle, you got to make sure if you hit the gas or the brakes, it's not going to just, open in the car. And so I would always get that and I would set it up. And sure enough, nobody ever asked me about the pee bottle, but it's a critical piece of gear. There are 3 critical things for a surveillance agent. You need a radio to talk to your team. You need a cup of coffee to stay awake. And you need a pee bottle because you have a cup of coffee. Right. And you can be there for as long as you need. I would bring 2 liters of coffee, a 2-liter pee bottle, and I was good to go for as long as necessary.
So you're an action guy, you're an impact guy, but you're spending hours sitting outside of homes or facilities where mainly nothing is happening.
For hours and hours.
Waiting
it's like hunting.
Right. I was about to say, sounds like deer hunting.
It's like deer hunting. It's like any other hunting. You're predator, or you're the predator. They're the prey in many ways. And what you're doing is you're watching for just a few moments of action. And the most fun was when your subject would come out the door and you're on the eye, which is what the person is that's watching the bad guy, or the subject that, of your surveillance. And you'd say, front door's opening. We're about to be on the move. Everybody would, put their books away or whatever it was, because everyone's scattered all over the place in what we call a surveillance bubble. And they're all over the place, ready to go. And everyone's watching and waiting. And then you call it out. Subject's in the car. I have reverse lights. He's turning left. He's driving out. He's going to be making a left turn at the stop sign. He is going northbound on fill in the blank road, out of my sight. And the next person picks it up. And now the chase is on. And now the team is going to follow. And that is really, really fun. There's no more fun than following people with a well-oiled, well-trained surveillance team and staying out of sight, because there's 2 things. You want to see what they're doing, and you want them not to see what you're doing. So I enjoyed the hell out of that. I did that for thousands of hours a year for 3 straight years, but that has a shelf life. There's only so long you can sit in there. You get, your back starts hurting if you're sitting in a car all day. And the travel schedule for me was pretty intense too. I think I had 20 surveillance deployments around the country for what the FBI called priority terrorist subjects. So I went to all kinds of wild stuff. My first 2 weeks on the team, I went to Alaska, and I had bald eagles that were doing counter surveillance and watching me. And I'm watching this guy that's supposedly a real bad guy, white supremacist. And he went on a backpacking trip, and that looked really fun. And I wished I was on the backpacking trip instead of in the car. We drove hours and hours and hours into the interior of Alaska. And he ended up getting on a bush plane that was in the water, like one of these duck planes that's at a dock. I swear to God, he just flew off, and we're like, well, I guess this just became airborne. Like, we can't do that. So he's gone. Surveillance discontinued after, hours of being out there. And we went and had waffles, and then we drove back to Anchorage. It's like, some of the stuff is really great, and you get some really good team time. And I always wanted to be on a team. I didn't want to be an individual guy sitting at a desk looking at Chinese. If it was a team of us looking at Chinese, that would have been fun. But that's not the way that the FBI generally worked, in my experience. So I did that for a little while. I eventually get a post that I requested, and I requested a post nobody else wanted. I wanted to go to Shelby, Montana, which is in the middle of nowhere, and it's awesome. And it was, I did 30 days up there working on an Indian reservation, which is the Blackfoot Reservation. And I was like, this is for me. There are dead bodies. There are dogs everywhere. There are holes in the road. It's 100-mile-an-hour winds, and we're finding bodies and bones in the middle of nowhere and driving through all this crazy stuff. And like, this is a riot. Like, this is what it's like, Wind River, except for real. And the FBI agents were not females. They were all a bunch of dudes who were just kind of hanging around doing funny stuff. And I thought, this is great. They had machine guns under their desks. They had some of the old MP5s, which were in 10 millimeter, that were ready to put down a bear. And I was like, this is it. Like, nobody's going to bother you out here. And I missed the spot by 1. They gave it to a female who was under 5 feet tall, who had never been in weather colder than 20 degrees. And she moved out there, and it's like 20 below with 100-mile-an-hour winds. It's like, it's the roughest place you could go. And they gave it to somebody else. So I ended up getting this other post in Las Cruces, New Mexico, which is basically going from the top of the country to the bottom of the country. No one even knows Las Cruces is in America, so that's great. It's just about an hour north of El Paso. And I picked a spot in the middle of the desert that had a mountain behind me and a mountain between me and the city. And I was living on a couple of acres, and I had coyotes in the backyard. My wife was always worried they're going to run off with the kids. That was also great. And we had cartel violence and weird stuff. So that's why
you're just assigned to a station there.
Yeah. I got assigned to the Indian reservation that was in Mescalero Apache. The Mescalero Apache Reservation is right near Ruidoso, New Mexico, in Lincoln County. So that's what I did. I would drive from Las Cruces, New Mexico. I drive about 100 miles across the desert through the White Sands Missile Range and Holloman Air Force Base and Alamogordo, New Mexico, which some people have heard of if they're into aliens and stuff. And then I would end up in the mountains, and I would go and I would work on the Indian reservation, which it's awesome. It actually looks a lot like Tahoe compared to like the rest of New Mexico. It's totally bizarre. Pine forests and beautiful lakes and stuff like that. And I did, criminal investigation. So mostly it was, I would get out there for either domestic assault, sexual assaults, or people that committed suicide. We do death investigations.
So in other words, on a reservation, you're the police.
You're a major crimes detective. The real police are the either Bureau of Indian Affairs or the tribal police. And then you're the investigator above that, where you're doing only specific types of major crimes. But that's what I would do. If there was a big fire, we had a big arson investigation that I was part of. A couple things like that. But that was really interesting work to me. I mean, it's what you think FBI agents do.
Yeah, that is
investigate
cool.
crimes instead of stare at Chinese spies.
All right, so far so good.
So far so good. So I'm there for a couple months. I'm having a good time. I'm like, this is great. I've got a great garage gym. I got guns. I got friends who own ranches. We can shoot coyotes and bad stuff and shoot pigs. Like everything was like kind of lining up. And then I get this email, and I get two emails. Number one says, you're going to get the COVID vaccine, whether you like it or not, mandate. This is Executive Order 14043 from the Biden administration. And I'd already had COVID on duty, and I had no interest in getting that shot. And I'm a pro-life Catholic. So I was like, this is a no-go for me. I don't like the way it was developed, and I don't know enough about it, and I'm not going to get it. And it's against my moral beliefs. So I filed a Title VII protected religious disclosure saying that these are my beliefs and do whatever you want. But I'm requesting a religious exemption. That was never addressed, by the way. It just went into a box where they ignored it forever. And then a couple of weeks later, I get an email from one of the supervisors in the office that is from a guy named Carlton Peoples, who still works for the FBI, and he's a senior executive. And it said that the FBI is going to be creating this brand new threat tag, EDU officials, which was going to be used to tag threats of violence against members of school boards, specifically, we all know, parents at school board meetings, because I follow the news pretty religiously. And so I immediately went to my member of Congress, not saying the FBI can't investigate parents at school board meetings, which they can, although they shouldn't, but they can, because there is a concept of interstate threats. And if you make an interstate threat, you're, technically in the jurisdiction of the FBI. But my concern is that I had just heard Merrick Garland say a few days earlier, probably 5 days prior to getting this email,
we're not doing this.
We are not doing this under the counterterrorism resources banner. And that's the real difference. That was actually my specific whistleblower problem. As many people may have looked at the statute, it says that there's like a very narrow scope of things that are considered to be whistleblower status. And you have to basically make a violation of rule, law, policy. You have to be a gross public safety issue. There's a couple others, fraud, waste, and abuse. And in my case, I believed that the attorney general may have perjured himself, which would be a violation of law. And he had done so in front of Congress, saying that we would not use counterterrorism resources to go after parents. And specifically, I had that belief because Carlton Peoples was the assistant director of the counterterrorism division, and he sent this thing out. And so when the AD of counterterrorism sends out a thing saying we're going to be tagging investigations into parents at school boards, and then the attorney general says that we're not doing that, that seems to me like a real problem. He did it under oath. I brought that to Congress. Now, I don't have to be right about that. I just have to be reasonable. That's what the statute says. And so that was my first whistleblower allegation. And a couple days later, I find out from an attorney friend of mine that the chief attorney in my division had reached out to the headquarters unit and said, hey, we got this problem. We get this guy who's both a whistleblower and a COVID vax refuser. What should we do with him? And they reached out and they talked to my friend, and he said, you should promote him. That was his answer, because he's a kindred spirit in many ways. Kind of an old school lawyer who also carried a gun. So those are the kind of people that I thought I was joining up to work with. And instead, they immediately suspended me. I was allowed to keep my pay as long as I had enough leave, which I did. And so from November 23rd, when I got kicked out of the office, until March 4th of the next year, this is 2021 going into 2022, I was not allowed to come into the office for fear of not taking the COVID shots and not wearing a mask and, whatever, and being a general ne'er-do-well, because they just didn't like the fact that I stood up to the Bureau in this case. At some point, my luck ran out in early January and they stopped paying me for 2 months. And then magically everything changed in the beginning of March. It was March 4th. It was my wife's 40th birthday. And I got to go back to work simply because Joe Biden was going to do the State of the Union address, and he needed to change the rules on COVID policy for federal buildings so that he could have people without masks at the State of the Union. And so it was very obvious to me, as someone who's lived outside of DC and followed the news, follows politics, doesn't want to, but did, that this was very, very arbitrary and capricious, as you might think. And so there I am. Like, I go back to work for 6 weeks. I made an allegation against my boss that he had abused his authority because my boss pulled down some body cam footage. I've been out in the desert. People that are in the Northeast have no familiarity with this, but in the Western states, there's tons of public land. It's owned by the American people, like the taxpayers, and it's just open. You can do all kinds of stuff. You can go hunting, you can go camping, you can go out there and hike around and things like that. And I was out doing some firearms training with my duty rig, with my gear that I would normally use for an arrest, with my belt and my badge and all the things that you'd expect in my personal truck. And I'm out there in the middle of the desert, and I'm well over half a mile away from the corner of a building, which turns out to be a school, but it's above like a hill, and then it goes down, and then the school's over there. And I'm shooting in the opposite direction into 20 miles of open desert. On the other side of that 20 miles is a mountain range. And on the other side of that is 80 miles more of desert until you get to the Indian reservation. It's basically all desert for like 100 miles. And I'm out there doing what I do, practicing drawing out of my holster, doing some shooting, working on my rifle, making sure the optics are zoned in and all that stuff. And a local cop comes out and he goes, "Hey, I don't know if we're in the city or the county." And I said, "We're in the county." And he goes, "Oh, okay. Well, I don't know what the state law is, but people are freaking out." And I said, "That's fine. People can freak out. The state law says I have to be 150 yards away from an occupied structure. I've got a rangefinder. Do you want to use it? That's 800 plus yards away." It turned out to be 865 yards away and in the opposite direction. And he goes, "Well, we had a very friendly interaction. Nothing happened. He agreed that he had no jurisdiction, that there was no code or law being violated." By the way, the only New Mexico code that has to do with shooting near an occupied structure does not apply to law enforcement officers. I found that's the last piece of the statute. And so as somebody who cares about the statute, who cares about what's right and wrong, who cares about what state law looks like, I looked it up before I went out there. I knew where the grounds were. I knew where the city limits were. I knew where the county limits were, et cetera. And so I had all the information. He had none of it. And he asked me to do something that he had no legal authority to do. And I reported to my boss, "Hey, I just had an interaction with the local police, as I am required by FBI policy." He went and got the body cam footage and started showing it around to all my colleagues.
The body cam footage from the local police
Of me just talking to him. Yeah. And by the way, he didn't get any legal process. He just called a friend who was like a sergeant on the force, and they pulled it down for him. Then he went and showed it to the secretary that I worked with. He showed it to the new probationary agent who just got out of Quantico. He showed it to the senior agents who were kind of like my peers, but people who were kind of like peer mentors. He showed it to the other supervisor in the office. And he basically, according to the written statements that I have, he went around to make sure that other people also thought that I was being a quote unquote asshole. That was his actual statement to the investigators, that he thought I was being an asshole, and he wanted to prove that he was right. And so he agreed with himself, and other people did and other people didn't. And I made an allegation that was an abuse of his authority. He had no investigation into me. He had no right to go pull that footage. He certainly had no right to share it with my colleagues and his subordinates. That wasn't necessary. He could have sent it to the inspection division, but he didn't. And so I reported him. And for 30 days, they investigated him. They closed that investigation, opened an investigation into me the same day they closed the investigation into him. And 3 days later, they took my badge and my gun away while I was sitting at a conference table. And that was the end of my FBI time. That was April 18th of 2022. And since then, well, I said, well, you got two options if you get removed from the Bureau. You can take it laying down, and you can go through the administrative procedures, which are basically useless. I actually consulted with one of the guys in your Virginia office, and I asked him, I said, "What do you think?" He goes, "Yeah, you probably spend, I don't know, $100,000 in litigation fees and attorney's fees, and you might win $100,000. Like, you probably could come out, you'd be vindicated, but it would cost you a lot of money. And there's no contingency for us to do this. This doesn't make a lot of sense." And I said, "Sure." So I represented myself in all the findings, and predictably, the government was, sided with the government. The government investigated the government and found the government did no wrongdoing, and therefore vindicated the government's standing and their decision.
Surprisingly.
Go figure. Nobody would ever expect this. It's totally off book. So all that goes down, and I decided that I had two options. I could basically be quiet and deal with that, or I could sell my house, get ourselves financially very, very lean. And I had some income that came in from a passive stream from my wife's, and I did some investments, and we had invested money when we left Virginia and when we had this house. So we sold our house, which is absolutely beautiful. We made a low six-figure amount on selling it, which was not nothing. and we put that in and we reinvested that. And we basically ended up so that we were never going to be starving. My children wouldn't know hunger, but we didn't own a home anymore. And then I went loud in September of 2022, and I went on Dan Bongino's podcast simply because, and I think God actually directed me to a lot of this stuff because I couldn't have told you why I did it. Somebody sent me a link to his podcast where he said, I'm talking to you, the whistleblower that exposed this thing. I think you're really brave. My microphone is for you. If you want to ever use it, or my Fox show, come to me. And then I did.
Hold on a second. Someone had told Dan about your case?
Didn't know me. He didn't know who I was.
No,
he just
but he
said,
knew that
he knew the FBI whistleblower. Yep.
He knew that there
Now,
had been an FBI whistleblower
correct,
who had been discharged for really penny ante crap, right?
Yep.
How did that? I mean, is that something that never ever happens?
People do not. Well, people get fired all the time for doing things that are the right thing. They just don't ever decide to get as vocal as I did. Now, one of the things I did is there was a document that's the Militia Violent Extremists Symbols Guide. And I brought that to members of Congress. My attorney and I sent it to everybody, but Harmeet Dillon also shared it on behalf of Project Veritas. So it made it through the channels of the people in Congress, as it often does, to a media source. And it was exposed in a very brilliant leak that went very big. And people went, oh God, what are they doing? They're calling people who like the Betsy Ross flag, like I have on my wall over here, and people who like the Gadsden flag, and people who are Mike Glover, who's a retired, Green Beret, who has like his own independent company and training. That guy is apparently a domestic terrorist. So if those people are bad, we're all screwed. And that made it pretty big. And I did a couple of other exposures that went the same way. All the routes are the same. I sent it to the right members of Congress. They managed to get it in the hands of people like Project Veritas or others. Washington Times has been pretty good about it too. And then the story gets really big. And then basically because of those things, and nobody knew it was the same guy that was doing all this stuff, but it was. And so because that was all happening, I get this link that was basically Dan Bongino, who I listen to pretty frequently, but not every single day. And they go, you got to hear this. He's talking to you directly. Not that he knows who I am, but he's talking to me. And so I said, will you put me in touch? And they put me in touch. His producer, Guy, who's a really neat guy, reaches out. And Guy says, so you're going to be on the show? And I go, oh, no. That's not what I said. I said, I'd like to talk to Dan and make it a decision because I'm going to put my life in somebody's hands is what I'm doing. Anybody who knows this, that's why he says it's so brave, because nobody wants to go up against the federal government. It's awful, especially publicly. And so Guy puts me in touch with Dan. Dan calls me. There's this moment in my life. I'm sitting out on my back porch just before we sold the house. The house is already for sale. It's ready to go. I think we even had a buyer. I think we were under contract. And I'm sitting out there for the last couple of days on my back porch, looking out at the mountains and this beautiful scene and all the desert that we had. And we had an arroyo, and it was really awesome. And I'd done all kinds of work on it to make it really pretty. I built a big gazebo and stuff like that. And I'm on the phone. And if you remember the movie Fight Club, there's an early part where Edward Norton is talking to Brad Pitt for the first time on the phone. They had met in a bar or something like that. And then Ed Norton calls him up, and Brad Pitt. So you only get the audio, and it's just like crunching, like he's eating peanuts. And it's like, and he's doing this kind of thing. And he's like, so what's going on? So yeah, and so that's what that's what Dan Bongino sounded like the first time that we talked. He was eating. I think he just got out of the gym. He sounded like he might be breathing a little hard. He was just like, he's like, what's up, man? Like, I'm in the middle of doing stuff. Like, you want to talk? Let's talk. And we talked for about 30 or 40 minutes. And I told him, I'm going to put my life in your hands. And I just kind of want to know who I'm dealing with. And I know everybody needs clicks and everybody wants likes and all this stuff. And he said to me something really profound, which people who listen to Dan Bongino instinctively know, but I'll say it explicitly.
He said, live animals.
He eats rats. Yeah, for sure.
And I mean,
like a snake.
I'm sure you all learned all about G. Gordon Liddy in your training. And okay. So,
but there's something else also that you learned about.
Something also that
already knew.
And what it is that Dan told me that he had invested in Rumble, and he anticipated having money that he wouldn't have to worry about for the rest of his life with his family because they made a big investment and it went really well. And he was going to take on my case and my problem of trying to expose the FBI like an activist, not like a journalist or not like somebody who's trying to get a quick hit on a podcast. But he said, I will not let you fail. And I believed him. And that has been the case. So I'm eternally grateful to him. My wife would send him thank you notes, and we have just like a lot of love. My daughters who are young, they call him Ban Dongino because they were like 3 and 4 years old when this was going down. And they said, is that your friend?
So what did Dan do for you?
He flew me out to Miami, took a car up, sat down in the studio. We'd never met before. And the first interview I did, which I believe was on September 23rd or 24th of 2022, we did it taped 2 straight hours, having never met before. And when he walked into the room, he was wearing the exact same thing that I was wearing. He was wearing brown shoes. I had brown boots. We were wearing blue jeans and black t-shirts. And his producer, Guy, looks over and he goes, "Did you guys plan this?" And we go, "No." It was really weird. So he puts on a jacket, we sit down, we mic up, and we just knock out 2 straight hours of talking, just verbal diarrhea. And that launched what ended up being like a lot of media attention. My wife and I thought we were going to just basically go back into hiding again. And instead, it launched me onto all the news programs you mentioned earlier on. It launched me into talking about this. And I've also been able to have other people from the FBI come to me and go, "You're already burned. You're already in public. I don't want to be public. You can be public. How about you take this information about the FBI targeting radical traditional Catholics and make that big in public? How about you take some of these other things out there and you own it?" Because they didn't want to expose themselves, and I don't blame them. But I'd already taken all the hit. They'd taken my job, they'd taken my career, they'd taken my pension and my healthcare and all that stuff. They'd taken
You
my
become
home in many
like a
ways.
clearinghouse for FBI whistleblowers,
Correct.
meaning
And so
that you are being intensely surveilled, as are all your communications,
I'm sure.
unless you take particularly rigorous measures with which you should have some familiarity as to what would be necessary.
It turns out, yeah, I actually spotted a surveillance team that was on me when I was flying to move all my household.
By the way,
goods.
you keep getting the like bubble keeps coming up.
Yes, so
That's
this
for your podcast.
It's from no, it's from my end. It keeps popping up
I
because
know
I
it's from
can't
your
disable it. It's coming up from this weird thing that just got set up on. It's an update that happened on my Mac, and for the last 2 days, it's been doing that. Every time I do this, it will pop up, and it's very frustrating. And if I do other weird things, it'll do other things because this is like an Apple feature. If I do this, I'm gonna get some confetti. I think, like I don't know. It's very straight. Do you see that?
I don't like.
I can do this. I can get a rainstorm. Like it's bizarre.
I think that's really great for teenage girls.
I know it's terrible.
But a G-man doesn't need these things.
I do. I don't want them. And you know what? My buddy Steve Friend thinks they're really great. He's another FBI whistleblower, and he puts them on all the time. And I just go, God, how do I disable this thing? I got to disable it again. In any case, that's what's going on. That's what that thumbs up are, because I talk with my hands like a crazy man.
So that's the story. That's how you became Kyle Seraphin. And
that people before that, totally ungoogleable. You couldn't find me anywhere because I didn't want to be anywhere. I had no interest.
You have a fairly. I mean, I know a few people with names like yours spelled different ways, but Kyle Seraphin, look at Ron Coleman. There are thousands of Ron Colemans and several Ron Coleman lawyers. I mean, you were ungoogleable despite having that unusual name, and now you're this guy. So is it okay? Is it all right? I mean, are you liking this new life? I mean, we were joking about it at the very beginning. Now you're sitting and you're not being an outdoor cat, you're being an indoor cat. And I guess you get to do stuff outside if you want. Just don't shoot within a mile of a schoolhouse, I guess. So believe it or not, no one's listening at this point. But there was no, you're good, but just I turn people off. But at the beginning, so the passage that the little quote, the soundbite is what we call it in the media, is that I played from Dan. I met Dan at the social media summit in 2020. Not 20, it was 2019, wasn't it? I think so. And I was positive he would follow me back after we hung out, and he didn't.
Oh no.
And then I realized, why the hell should he?
Does he follow you now?
He doesn't. He actually called me out once in a broadcast where he said, someone must have brought some tweet of mine to his attention and described me as he's kind of a lawyer, kind of an activist. Doesn't matter. Dan, I got no problem with that. So no, my point was, what you've described is to a large extent a cultural phenomenon. In other words, everyone has known, as long as I've been conscious of the FBI, which is for a very long time, because growing up in the 60s and 70s, you'd watch the FBI TV show, which was incredibly accurate, I'm sure, in every respect.
100%. Yeah, everyone thinks so.
That the FBI is a kind of a cult within itself. I mean, you had the Hoover cult, and then after Hoover died, you had the Hoover cult. And it has this incredible loyalty culture, which you kind of wanted a paramilitary organization. I mean, you want to know guys have your back and all the things. But it seems to me that as much as anything, like what you got burned over was not some political controversial issue. Yeah, I mean, there's the COVID thing is in there, but ultimately your encounter with the cop over the shooting range was, like I said, penny ante baloney.
Yes, and has been actually very recently been outed that way. They said no, under no circumstances should that have resulted in more than a letter of censure, at worst, because that's what it would have been.
So, but I mean, it's not all that different, is it, from a typical police department, right?
Yeah. So
Or is
crazy
it? Do
enough,
you think it is?
like guys get away. Well, as far as like, is there like that thin blue line kind of mentality where you got to protect? Yeah. Here's the thing. I'd like to think the FBI, and if you went back to me 15 years ago and you said, what's the FBI about? What's your impression? I'd like to believe the FBI is better than that. I'd like to believe in my heart, the FBI should have been a place where people's loyalty to the Constitution was far greater than the loyalty to the FBI. The FBI is incidental. It just turns out you work at the FBI, but you serve the American people for the Constitution. Call me a naive, patriotic type. That is actually very, very true for me. I am that.
So now that you have become this vessel for whistleblowing, has that taken you beyond? I mean, after all, you didn't leave the FBI in a huff because you said, this is just, what we're doing is terrible. This is just wrong. They fired you. They walked you out the door.
Well, they claim that I actually resigned because they left me unpaid as a suspended unpaid FBI agent for a year. So I went for an entire year between April of 22 and April of 23 without a paycheck, considered an FBI employee, and they investigated me the entire time through the internal affairs apparatus, not through a criminal process, which they had access to as an administrative sort of remedy. I actually resigned on my podcast, of all places, simply because I wanted them to stop doing the internal investigation, because they have different authorities than they would under a real criminal investigation. And that seems pretty nonsensical to me, because I've never had a job that didn't pay me for a year, but still thought that I was accountable to them. And they did that. That is very cult-like in many ways. So yeah, I mean, we would argue constructive termination or constructive discharge. That's what me and my buddies have talked about. What you do about that is sort of irrelevant. The end result is the same for me. But yeah, they considered me this sort of, I did resign, I suppose, because I said I didn't work there anymore. I acknowledged them breaking up with me. It's like a bad ex-girlfriend. I keep telling people the FBI is like a crazy ex-girlfriend that you come home and she's changed the lock. She's thrown all your stuff on the front lawn. She's lit it all on fire. It's sitting there burning and she's screaming, "Why don't you love me?" And you're going like, "I don't know. I'm out of here. I'm going to go stay at my dad's house for a couple of weeks." And then you come back and she was like, "Are we together or what?" And you're like, "No, I don't want to be together. You burned all my stuff. I'm out. I don't live here anymore. I don't even have any connection to you." And she was like, "You still owe me." That's crazy.
You might be too glib and colorful for the FBI anyway. I mean, you see,
100%. I'm way too much fun.
Clearly, I mean, because I would, if I watched podcasts, which I can't stand, I would watch you for sure.
Yeah, but for sure. Yeah, who knew?
So this works out.
This is the joke that we used to do. I would go and do interviews, and I would bring in new guys from the academy. And like, look, I joined the FBI Academy at 35 years old. I graduated, I was 36. And so I'm older than a lot of the people there. You have to be 25 to be an FBI agent. I got a decade on those people. So I have this sort of pattern in my life coming into things like too old. I was a dad at 36 too. I was too old to have my first child at that age, but so be it. Like, it turns out I'm way more tired, way more grumpy, but I'm also a lot wiser. So that's useful. And so I'm going through this FBI Academy surrounded by these people, and they don't know how to talk to people, because I used to do outdoor sales and I used to work with guys who were grunts, and I used to dig holes, and I've done regular people things, and regular people are the types of people that we investigate. People who own a business, people that are like, have employees, people that are employees. These are the kind of people you talk to. Not everybody is a white collar investigator doing fraud that only knows about books. So when I went out to talk to people, I would talk to them like I'm talking to you, like a regular guy. I make jokes. I'm not that serious. I tell them, look, this is what's going on. I'm very straightforward. When I say, you don't have to talk to me. You can tell me to go F off, and I will. I won't even hold it against you. I would tell me the same thing. But if you want to talk to me, you can. And overwhelmingly, people would say this: "You're not what I expected when I met an FBI agent." And I'd say, yeah, that's because they're a bunch of nerds. And so I would say that. My partner would always look at his shoes, and then we would both laugh. Like, all of us would laugh except the partner. And I felt kind of bad for it, but it's really important that you break that barrier to establish rapport with regular people if you want them to talk to you. And the other thing is, once they've given you that rapport, there's a certain amount of respect and honor that comes in it. You have to be honest about it. So I was honest. That's the easy thing to do. They would come out and say weird things, Ron. They would knock on your door and they would say, "Hi, I'm Kyle Seraphin. I'm from the FBI. Your name came across my desk. I wondered if you talked to me." And I would always do the same thing when I'd role play with these guys, because I love doing the role play interview thing. I'd say, my name came across your desk, huh? Do you have a conveyor belt? Or is it like a Wall Street ticker? How do you choose which names you're going to pick from the names that come across your desk? And they have no idea how to answer that. I say, why do you say word? They don't have any meaning.
I mean, that is a purposefully meaningless phrase that's chosen precisely for the. In fact, so you mentioned that because when I was going out with my wife, she was a lawyer for the Anti-Defamation League at the time, and she was in this small legal group there. And this is before they completely ran off. They lost the story, and Cliff. That's what you're helping me out with there. Thank you. And she taught me that when you have to write back to someone who you've been ignoring for months, because one of her main jobs was handling letters from prisoners who may or may not have been Jewish, but they heard the ADL sometimes helps people out, so they would write letters about this. I recently had the opportunity to turn to your letter.
That's right.
Utterly, in other words,
it's nonsense.
Opportunity. So yeah, your name came across my desk. Okay, so
it's just a weird thing to say. I don't know why you would train it. So I would just try to catch them off, because people are wily when they've committed crimes, and even victims are weirded out by the FBI being there. And so if you act weird as well and say weird things that have no meaning, then people will respond to you in a disingenuous way. So my goal is to disarm people. I just want to be a regular guy. I was a sales guy for a while. So I know what that's like.
Were you good? I mean, objectively speaking, would your record show a good record of, were you getting commendations and normal
from the FBI
and stuff? Yeah.
Oh, for sure. I got an award every year on average. Some of them were for silly things, a lot of them for doing above and beyond, because I like to build stuff. That's the other thing I told you. I went to that surveillance team. I looked around. It was a dumping ground for agents that were not able to get along with other people. You want to talk about something stupid? This is perfect government. You say, hey, you're a lousy agent by yourself. You're not very good at investigating, and you're all by yourself doing nothing in your cubicle. Why don't you go sully up an entire team of people so that one guy can ruin 6 people's jobs instead of one person ruins their own job? So they would send you over to these teams. So I started recruiting, and I got a commendation for it. I got the highest cash award that the FBI offers. It's a Category D award. It was $3,000, which nobody had ever heard of. They wrote me a check for $3,000 as a bonus, literally because I was doing something that nobody else did. I organized all of our gear. I put on an inventory system because we had no inventory system.
So they have management tools in place to reward initiative.
Of course, yeah. They have another thing they call a step increase, where they bump your pay grade up. They stopped doing those. QSI is what they're called, quality step increase. If you do a good job, we bump your pay up within the same grade, your GS-13, but you could be a step 2 or a step 3. So they used to do those. They don't do them as much. But I got the next closest thing, which was a cash award, which was the equivalent of, bumping me up a little bit of pay. But yeah, I got awards. It happened. I got awards the first day I was in Albuquerque.
So the thing that you did that was wrong was basically you bucked the hierarchy.
Yeah, and I'm not one of those people that like reveres the FBI. I was, like I said, I don't mind saying feds are a bunch of nerds. Self-deprecation, I think, is sorely lacking in federal law enforcement.
Well, that's why they're so easy to spot when they put on their masks and pretend to be white nationalists. I mean, you can just smell the nerd. I'm sorry?
That and the khakis. They didn't change pants.
Who do they think they're fooling? So, I mean, were you the last guy with an IQ over 100 working at the place? I mean,
no, they're sad. The sad thing is this: there's a lot of smart people that are medium smart. There's a couple of people that are very smart. A lot of people that are indoctrinated. So there's a mixture of things. This is the thing that most people don't grasp. First of all, the FBI is not a monolith. You can't speak about it. There's 38,000 people. They all have their own story. And I would never choose or deign to speak about like I knew what they were all about. But what I do know is that overwhelmingly FBI agents lean conservative. Libertarian probably is more accurate. Most people aren't that political to begin with. But if they did, they lean on the side of civil liberties. Let's say it's 60% of the agents. They're recruiting a lot more that are not. But of those 60%, that's 60% of what? Less than 14,000. So agents are already the minority of the total employees of the FBI. They used to be the superior, sort of the highest level. All of the serious management positions were staffed by agents. That's no longer the case. So that's a problem.
Yes,
that's been going on for 20 years.
That's something that was explained to me at length by Shipley.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, he knows.
He told me that absolutely revolutionized for the not for the best, not for the better.
Yeah, it's sad. That's how the Bureau started to die. There's a couple things they started to do. That's one of them. And Mueller was directly sort of people that are FBI historians and people that are FBI agent historians. They all say that Louis Freeh was the last director. And everybody that I talked to that was an old timer, that had 25 years of service. I say old timer, but I mean like for Bureau guys, I'm 3, 4 years, 5 years in, and I'm on a surveillance squad with guys that had 20 and 25 years of experience, some of them 26, 27. And they're going into extensions because they love the FBI. They love what the FBI was about. Don't get me wrong. There were sins in every decade. You can go back to the Palmer raids of 1917 and 1919. Like, the FBI has committed sins mostly against the political left, interestingly enough, but they've been doing it for a very long time. And, and it doesn't matter whether you talk about the McCarthy stuff and going after in the Red Scare and going after civil rights leaders. Like, the FBI's got a lot of blood on its hands, no doubt about it. But I think that was
if the
always kind of
CIA hadn't existed, the FBI would have had to invent it.
That's right, because they needed a partner in crime, right? They were all by themselves.
And someone who was probably guilty of worse stuff. Believe it or not, though, I mean, the good thing is that this podcast is called the subtitle of the podcast is Interesting People. We just got to meet a really interesting people. We didn't really hardly talk about the stuff, but you've got an incredible story, and I'm glad we got to know each other. And I think we're going to have to do another meeting to talk big picture stuff. Now that I and the audience know more about you, you're having fun. It seems like you manage to always have fun. I mean, after all, you're a guy who has fun sitting in a duck blind, for
watching bad guys peeing in a bottle.
We won't go there. And you've got this great relationship with Dan Bongino, who's, who I mean, what the heck, that you're staying busy. So I'm going to show folks, if they want to learn more about you and your adventurous life, the Kyle Seraphin Show.
Yeah, you just use KyleSeraphin.com.
So there's you, recovering FBI agent. I think you're covering rather well.
Thank you.
Federal whistleblower, civil liberties enthusiast. You seem to be that as well. Second, we didn't talk at all. It's about two-way. Guys on Rumble. The guys, of course, he's got a link tree. Everyone's got a link tree. That doesn't prove anything. Facebook, Insta. You can see him in no bathing suit pictures. Okay. I assume that if that's what you're on Instagram, that's what you're doing.
I hate Instagram. I feel like it's just a repository for online prostitutes. I don't understand what it's about. I despise everything that's meta, but someone told me I had to save at least the link. So I did. I'm mostly on Twitter. That's where I like to engage.
That's me too. Twitter is absolutely the way to go.
It's a cesspool, but it's fun.
We're going to have to hang out again. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and getting your interesting story out through, not through the ColemanNation. It's ColemanNation. See, it's a pun that nobody gets.
I get it. I like it.
But that's my life, is I'm basically operating on a level that, well, just not appreciated so much.
If you operate above the 70th percentile, you got a lot of people that are never going to get it. That's just how it works.
Selective appeal, I think, was the term that we learned.
I like it.
All right, Kyle, great. We'll hang out some more. A real good talk. Wait. So now you live where?
Now you're in Texas again.
Are you back in Texas?
Yes, sir.
And you completely ruled out the bed and breakfast? No going back to that?
Not in Vermont. Maybe in Idaho.
What was it that, like, what surprised your wife about Vermont?
The town was Brattleboro. I'll be very specific. We went in the summer.
Bastards. I know what they do there.
Mm-hmm. And we went there, and I stayed at the Colonial Motel and Spa, the first motel and spa I've ever been to. Been to hotels and spa, but never motels and spa. And we got in the room, and there were bugs in the room. There were bugs under the sheets. That wasn't a good look. And then there were hookers next door that were setting out their lawn chairs waiting for Johns. And my wife asked me if I was armed because she was afraid of axe murderers. And then we went through the town, and it seemed it was like the Hawaii of Vermont. And I'll describe it as this. It was a place that was both economically depressed, but also depressing. And it was people that relied on tourist dollars and despised the people who they relied upon. That was a sad moment, and we didn't want to be part of that in a way. I hope it's not the same way, but I suspect it probably is. That's a tough culture to be in, where people hate outsiders, but they rely on outsiders for their survival. It's
a lot of New England that isn't coastal, and as well as upstate New York, the Catskills region.
Yep.
There's nothing doing there. There's no infrastructure. There's no reason you would build a factory there, even if they weren't, if it weren't economically untenable. And then they go and vote Democrat.
They do indeed, don't they? It doesn't make any sense to me.
All right, buddy. I think you and I could talk all night. You're in Texas, though, so we probably won't have a chance to have dinner in the reasonably certain future. But great talking to you. Thanks.
Likewise.
For culminating with me.
I appreciate it.